Well, Ohio is always a key state, so it's great that we have an ally there. But he brings up something which I want to ask you, Jean, is that there's a disconnect here in that climate change is a huge long-term issue, and corporations work on a quarter or 2 or 3, and Congress is 2 years, 6 years, max 8 years. So there's a lot of short-term thinking to be responsive to, and having to be responsive to constituencies when we're now facing not just climate change, but some other drivers for the future that are definitely long-term. We have to have long-term strategies. From your point of view, working with Congress so long, what do you see is going to come forward, given that there's a disconnect there?
It's a really good question. I reflect back 3 years ago. Tom and I sat on the stage in August of 2011, and as Tim said, the Congress had passed a comprehensive bill in 2009, and we were all on a roll and thought we were going to get it done. But 2010 was a horrible year from a national perspective because that bill died in the Senate, didn't even have a vote because the Democrats were even scared to have a vote, and that the elections in November of 2010 were mostly horrible. But the best news out of 2010 was that the folks in California, George Schultz, who we talked about earlier, and Tom Steyer as the co-chairs, teamed up to defend the strongest global warming law in the country, which was under attack from those 2 Texas oil companies. So in terms of looking for hope, a few things. One is that we don't expect Congress to pass a bill anytime really soon. Let's be straight on that. Hats off to Mark and all the work that folks have done to develop the next forward-thinking policies and to begin to do that organizing. But there are a couple ways we're going to make progress in the short term. One is to go back to the states. And the states are the laboratories. And California has been the leader, but other states are picking that up. You've got governors in Washington and Oregon want to do what California's doing. You've got a lot of New England and Northeastern governors leaning into this. So there's a lot of hope in terms of the state policies. We've heard more than once today that even though Congress won't get the job done, the president has leaned into this, particularly in the last year, since his speech last June of 2013, and really using the power of his executive authority with our dear friend John Podesta in the White House helping to nudge him along. And so, lo and behold, we have an EPA back on June 2nd announcing by far the most aggressive proposal to cut carbon pollution this country has ever seen. It's not a done deal. That's just a proposal. But there's a lot, but all the work that folks need to do to organize that and to fight to make that a reality, in fact, to even make it tougher. So while we have to take a long-term view, and it's going to take a while for Congress to be successful, the positives about working in the states, the laboratories, to push the best policies forward, and continue to back up EPA and to back up the president to use the authority of the Clean Air Act to get the job done. And in the meantime, and Tom and our groups are both focused on the elections of 2014, because one of the other things we have to do is, I love, President Carter we call them climate deniers. He called them nutcases. I kind of really like that. But the point is, we got to win the policy. And there are a lot of good policy ideas. We have to win the politics. And part of our goal in 2014 is to make sure that if you're a climate change denier, then you're paying a political price. And that's part of what we're all about. Tom's group and our group teamed up in Virginia so that Terry McAuliffe is the new governor, in part because he called out his opponent for being a climate change denier. So hope in the states, hope at EPA, and we need to make, just like we did in 2013, make climate change denier. If you're a denier, that's going to cost you at the ballot box and make that a liability. So those are some of our strategies going forward.
Great.
And Sally, I want to a good policy, good state and federal policy creates an opportunity for private investors to do what they do best, which is make money. If we get the policies right, the durability will come. And currently we have the marketplace so askew by so willingly hiding all these costs. We routinely deny important negative externalities. We put upon people and we don't pay them for it. And as soon as we get the market signals more right, because we've got state and federal policies that get it more right, private money is going to chase profits, which it does well, and that will create durability.
Tom, thank you. Thank you for inserting that. Tom, you have really stepped out and stepped up to this issue.
Hear, hear. Hear, hear.
And anytime somebody does that at the level that you've decided to do that, is going to get a lot of heat and a lot of support. So when you decided that you were going to put up this $50 million, you were going to focus on ads and raise another 50. You were going to focus on ads. You were going to focus on the swing states. Why did you feel that that was the best investment right now for your money?
Well, I left my job. Let me step back for 1 second from 2014 to 2012. I left my job as an investor at the end of 2012 because I felt that this was an overwhelming issue, and I felt that there weren't enough people who were trying to bring it to the urgent care that it needed from the American people. And not that I thought I was so special, but that I felt that there needed to be soldiers in that army pushing it forward and bringing it to the attention of America. And we looked to see what the jobs were. There's actually, we brazenly pirated a map from the Skoll Foundation showing who was working on energy and climate. And it basically had little circles, and the size of the circle, there was a circle for each organization, and the size of the circle was its budget. So there were scientific organizations, and there were policy organizations, and there were political organizations. And there were fantastic science organizations that we all know about that do great work. There were policy organizations that have been around for 40 or 50 years that are tremendous, that have great histories, great people, great programs, and really incredible capability. But when you got to the political part, there was Gene Karpinski. And not that I don't trust Gene Karpinski.
We need more.
But when you looked at the size of his circle, and you looked at the size of the circles everywhere else, you could see that he was much smaller, honestly. His budget was a fraction of what some of the major environmental organizations are. And we looked and said, what is the means of social change in the United States of America? And for over 200 years, the means of social change has been politics, that human beings go and vote. We have a right, citizens have a right to vote, and everybody gets their equal voice. So that's why we were focused. That's why we decided that politics was the way for social change in our country. And I just want to make one other point about what I perceive as going on in 2014, which is this. I perceive this, and the first things that we did, as Gene said, we ran bipartisan, large coalition campaigns in California for propositions. Always bipartisan, always including business voice, labor voice, every ethnicity. But what we've seen and what we see in 2014 is how incredibly partisan this issue has become. And I know we keep talking about the need for it not to be partisan, and I understand that we really can't win with only one party. I mean, that's just the way the votes add up. The idea that we could win this in a single party in the near future, that is not the rules that can happen in the Congress of the United States. We can do all the things Gene said, but we can't win in the Congress of the United States. But if you look in the states, I'll just give you one instance. In Ohio, and I completely agree with the congressman, Ohio is a great state for clean energy. They have fantastic manufacturing capability. Yeah. They actually have created a ton of jobs. They had very good state rules about renewable portfolio standards and energy efficiency, which were put on hiatus this year in a very fast total party line vote and signed by the governor, so that those rules, and we're totally dependent on good policies, that include all the externalities, are on hiatus, so that the very state where we know it's important for jobs and the economy and doing the right thing currently has no RPS and no energy efficiency laws right now. So this is much more competitive than I think sometimes people think who live in states that are blue states.
What I'm really curious about how the two of you have been working together in these swing states. I keep going back to this. How you've been working together. And then I want to ask Mike, from his perspective as an elected official at the state level, what he thinks about whatever you two are going to say.
So let me take a random state of Colorado, where we both decided it's a priority. And as you said earlier, we do a scorecard. One of the things we do is we take scores at everyone, lifetime scores, annual scores. A guy named Mark Udall, your current senator, has a 97% lifetime score. And not only does he vote right almost all the time, he's a champion on the renewable electricity standard. So, and on a whole host of issues. He just leans in and is a leader. He leads sponsors of all kinds. He gets it. And his wife Maggie comes out of the movement as well. She gets it. It's a team that works all the time on this. 97% lifetime score. Cory Gardner, 9% lifetime score. So there's a sharp contrast there. And not by accident, as both Tom's folks and our folks said, let's figure out our short list of priority states. Colorado made that list for all those obvious reasons. It's as we sit here today, it's a toss-up race. Interesting to watch Gardner. He originally he was out there as a climate change denier. Now that he's being, and to his credit, Mark has actually been bashing him for that. So he's kind of wiggled with his words a little bit. But there's a sharp contrast. In fact, I'm going to use the occasion to show the and the other thing is there are these things called the Koch brothers. And sometimes the articles talk about the Koch brothers versus the Steyer brothers, but it's not the same. The Koch brothers are in it for their bottom line. Tom's in it because he cares about the planet. And people know that, but the press likes that kind of simple thing. And the last I checked, the Ford's 400 numbers weren't quite the same yet either. So, but they're all in on the other side. And part of the thing that we've realized, and we've done a lot of research together, is that, don't just react. Attack the attackers and go on the offense against them. The same out-of-state oil billionaires message that was so powerful in Colorado in 2010 is powerful in state after state where the Koch brothers are playing. So I want to play an ad that it's basically Tom and I, we've done almost the same kind of ads in different places. But I'll give you one example, one just showed here in Colorado. Gardner.
Do we have that?
There's a smear campaign going on in Colorado, backed by the out-of-state oil billionaire Koch brothers, steering $1 million into attack ads. Why? Congressman Gardner supports their agenda. Gardner voted to keep giving billions in special taxpayer-funded subsidies to oil companies. $1 million smear campaign. Billions for big oil. Cory Gardner's just too extreme for Colorado. The League of Conservation Voters is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Great.
So back to you, Tom.
Okay, so Tom, what are the swing states? There's several that are that are swing states right now, but you chose 7. Is that right?
I think so. Well, what we did, and I think that it's very similar to what Jean was describing, is we tried to go into states where the candidates, there was a big distinction between the candidates, so that you knew, as you know in the Colorado Senate race, that there were who got elected made a substantial difference. Secondly, we tried to be in states that we think are in and of themselves important, and we wanted to be in states that we thought were important in the context of the United States. So the states are, and I'm sure I'll screw this up, but Florida, Colorado, Iowa, Maine, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. And then we're looking at we're doing some other things that are not statewide races in other states, including my home state of California. But let me make one distinction. This is, in 2014, this is a non-presidential year. So when you look at the turnouts in non-presidential years, there's a fraction of presidential year because people like to go and vote in president, and then they vote for all the other people on the ballot because they're already there at the polling place, or they're already filling it out at home. And so in 2014, when you think about politics, and when you think about what you want to accomplish if you want to change a race, it's much more important about who goes to the polls than trying to persuade them how to vote. The fact of the matter is, if you get your voters to the polls, the people who the information technology is now so good in politics that you can have a very high probability of understanding who Sally's going to vote for if she goes to the polls. And the question is she going to go to the polls? And by the way, a lot of the people who most support energy and climate candidates, like Mark Udall, are the biggest drop-off voters for a variety of reasons. So they tend to be young. All the people, his voters, are probably more drop-off than Cory Gardner's voters by a fair bit. So one of the things that is true this year, just so you know, in those states, we are focused not so much on TV ads, but on the things that will be kind of old-fashioned 18th century American politics of trying to get people, local people, to talk to local voters and citizens about what's important and why it's important enough for them to get off the couch and go down to the polling place on the first Tuesday in November and show up. Because this is much more about showing up than it is about persuasion.
And do you think more women will show up in this midterm election?
Let's hope so.
Well, let me say this.
But I mean, do you have polls? Do you have any information that they will or they won't in these states?
Traditionally, women are better voters, particularly in midterm elections, and women also happen to be better voters on energy and climate. So,
of course.
So that's right.
I want to speak
Yes.
about their strategy.
Yes. Okay.
Because I appreciate both of what they do. It's very, very important work. I can argue, I think, very effectively that Montana should be on the list. 25% of the nation's coal is found within Montana's borders. We've had a great Democratic representation in the United States Congress. We're about to lose a Senate seat that's been held by Democrats for 100 years. All of our Democrats stood in our House chamber during a joint session of the state legislature and spoke in favor of the Keystone XL pipeline. The entire room stood in standing ovation, except one Democrat. I could not get out of my seat and clap for John Tester when he spoke in favor of Keystone XL. So we still have a lot of work to do in Montana. We've got a renewable portfolio standard that's under attack. Now, on this notion of a big score with LCV, and Gene would know this, that's good. That's a big score from LCV is good. I'm not surprised Senator Udall's got it. At the state level, there's state chapters, Montana Conservation Voters, for example. I have a good, solid score with MCV. It runs at, say, 91 or 88, somewhere in there. If you run a big number, 98, the Republicans in my state don't pay any attention to you. They don't talk to you. They assume that you're a lost cause. If you want to try to move the needle with the other side, you've got to be very strategic about when you vote and how you vote, so you illustrate this capacity to collaborate and cooperate and find common ground. And I take pride in the fact that I don't have an MCV score of 100. That would make me a far less effective legislator than an MCV score of 88. So those are some thoughts on the strategy as it relates to the state of Montana.
Okay. I have one other question, and then we're going to open it up to the floor for questions. I want to ask Tom about your fundraising efforts for matching your $50 million. How is that going?
Well, we won't know for sure for a while. We've gotten a bunch of money. We have not gotten 50 million bucks. We have gotten a lot of people who I think will put in money alongside us as opposed to through us. And I'm not, because I think people like to, particularly people when they think they're spending a lot of money, like to feel as if they have some control over it and as if it's their effort. So I think that the question in my mind, the ultimate question will be, will we have enough money to run the programs that we think are necessary in these races? And the answer to that is definitely yes.
And what do you see, for example, in Colorado? We've got, you're supporting and helping Mark Udall. What kind of arsenal does his opponent have?
Well, I know, I don't have the numbers in my head in Colorado, but I do know what's been going on nationwide in the states where we're focused. And that is, I'll give you one number, which is the Kochs are supposedly spending $300 million this year on elections. I would say they have been up on the air since the first quarter of 2014. There are Democratic office holders who they're trying to get rid of, who have been barraged with negative advertising, literally starting in the first quarter, and where it's continued the whole time, and there's been no real response. In a lot of these states, and it will be different at the end, but the spending ratio was 7-to-1 for the Republicans versus the Democrats, and there are many states where they've been up for months, where the Democrats are just now, in July or August, starting to run TV ads. So in terms, I think that when I said I don't think people understand how competitive this is, it's partly about the money that's being spent against Democrats, but I think it's really important to understand the money that's being spent against incumbent Republicans who are not sufficiently conservative. And that's one of the things that we see, and I'll give you one example of this, which is in New Hampshire, it's a very purple state. You know, there's one senator who's a Republican and there's one who's a Democrat. The Republicans control the state Senate, the Democrats control the state legislature. The governor happens to be a woman who's a Democrat named Maggie Hassan, whose pride and whose resume are built around the idea of doing bipartisan legislative work. That she's managed to push through a series of bills, including in this term, and her term is only 2 years, with bipartisan support. Every state senator who's a Republican who voted with her, except I think the leadership, is being primaried by people from the right, because it is unacceptable in the eyes of certain parts of the Republican Party to cooperate or to get together with Democrats and vote together to pass legislation that is necessary. And that is a huge threat. If you put yourself in the position of those Republican state senators, that's their career, and someone's saying, if you don't do what we want, we're going to attack you with a lot of money, and for sure, you're not going to move up in the Republican Party in New Hampshire. And if you go the other way, you're going to have as much money as you want to run, and maybe you can move up in the leadership, and maybe you can run statewide. So that is actually the environment, the political environment in which we're operating.
No, that's really very true. You ask about women, and obviously of the drop-off voters, unmarried women are one of those big segments of drop-off voters, as well as young people and Latinos and African Americans. But one thing that draws out women voters is women candidates. Yeah. So we didn't talk about this. Just to flag, there are three interesting women candidates in the South. So you got Allison London Grimes running against Mitch McConnell. She's not one who even wants our support, because she's in a different place on the issues we care about, but she's just running a fascinating race. In North Carolina, Kay Hagan, more money. Tom talked about the Koch brothers. She's had more money spent against it than any other candidate, over $10 million just in North Carolina, and she's still hanging in there. She's the incumbent. Yeah. And then I know there are a few folks from Georgia happen to be here, and Michelle Nunn is an incredible candidate, and it's a toss-up, tough race, and so those are three fascinating races, and those candidates are all leaning into these issues in different ways. The two of them, not Grimes, but the other two, are leaning into these issues, calling out their opponents for being deniers, and I think having women candidates helps bring out that women vote for sure.
Yeah. Okay, I would like to open this up to the floor, please. Questions? Okay. We got one right here.
Wait for Mike, or just be loud.
Mike.
Hi, thank you guys, and my hat's off, Mr. Steyer. It's amazing, your contribution, and everyone, your efforts. I've been following these issues for a long time. Your question of the panel, can we get a political agenda in time? While I'm optimistic and supportive of your efforts, and I'm making a statement first, and I'll ask a question. If I follow Jim Hansen, if I read Bill McKibben, if I take those things to heart, the a priori answer is no. We're not. We're not making it. We're not. The damage is being done across the globe. The damage is being done to the populations. The damage is being done here at home in Aspen. I'm taking the half-empty motion for a second.
So
the question is, it seems in listening to the discussions that a lot of this has to do with economic theology. Our relationship to economics, and I applaud the contributions that you're making. Can we sustain and solve the problems of the globe if we remain in a nation-state capitalist, profit-oriented economy. If profit motive,
Is that your question?
I'll leave it there. But it
Okay,
relates
thank
to
you.
exactly what you said
Thank you.
regarding the Cokes, if there's always more money.
We don't have very much time.
I want to make something very clear on this notion of what we can change with a political agenda. And this is just the way the science plays out. And as a scientist, that's where I tend to drift. And I was intrigued by serving in politics because I don't think the scientific voice is well represented. The die is cast on weather patterns that will define the climate for many, many, many decades, probably hundreds, if not thousands of years. That's just the physics of CO2 in the atmosphere. That's the physics of the ocean collecting most of the heat. What you can do today is still promote prosperity and justice and peace with a whole new energy future. You can minimize the damage going forward, minimizing the changes going forward. So you shouldn't do more than you can do today because the die is cast on weather for a long, long time. But be mindful, the die is cast on weather for a long, long time. And of course, average weather is climate.
Can I address that?
Yes,
Do you want to go first, Gene?
No, I mean, look, the problem is before us. We know we're hurting. There are a lot of things we need to do. We need to do more of all of them. Vice President Gore had I thought a fascinating piece in Rolling Stone about a month ago about yes, it's a challenge, but here are the things happening. Part of which is a lot of people in this room, the new clean energy economy, that's happening out there. And it's kind of going faster than we think in some ways there. So there's reason to be half empty, but you have to look at the half full and plow forward.
So,
and,
Tom, go ahead.
Can I say this?
Yeah.
First of all, can we save ourselves in time? This is all shades of gray. There are going to be impacts. There are going to be events. There's no way to change it. But not doing something means those events and those impacts are going to be much greater. So can we save ourselves in time? We have to do this no matter what. That's the first point. Second point, I don't think any of us have any idea about the creativity and power if we have the rules right of what America can do. I think we're so shortchanging ourselves as a country. I think our ability to do things when we look back at what we've done in the past and the kind of changes we made, when we look at how this country changed itself in World War II, when we look at what we've done in information technology since 1983 when they broke up AT&T, our ability to make change here is incredible. And one of the things that I find most ironic is that the people who say that they're the real defenders of capitalism are fighting like hell to prevent the energy and creativity and innovation of the American people from solving this. I find that crazy.
Well, thank you. Rutherford.
Yes, thank you all. Tom, thanks so much for the donation, for getting things going here. As you look at GoTV, get out the vote. Y'all haven't talked about that. Just nonprofit dollars to foundations and other, can do educational work. In the South, I'm from Georgia, you might be able to tell. And Mrs. Carter gave a little plug, maybe too polite. Make sure you know, I just got the polling numbers. It's a very close race. He's going to be at the top of the ticket, along with Michelle Nunn. Clintons were the last ones that won Georgia. You change Georgia, you get the Deep South for the first time in 20 years. But getting the vote out, just what you were talking about, Tom, is so important. As we look around this room, people of color are very important. We've talked about women, suburban women in Georgia, very important. But we have to make sure, because the poor folks and minorities and people who are sick and tired of living next to the dump and the coal mine and the downwind from the power plant, they're the ones that have been activated in the South for good reasons in the past, and we should not leave them unnoticed, and we can get those votes out if we really work on that too. So at your point, I want to ask, what are y'all doing on GoTV?
Okay. So anybody want to answer that quickly?
I think we all are. As Tom said, as you said, Rutherford, drop-off voters is the key, and there's 4 groupings, what we call the Rising America. It's young people, it's unmarried women, it's Latinos, and African American. In each state, it's a little different. In Georgia in particular, the African American community is the key for Michelle Nunn and Jason Carter to win. So in each place, and you can target with the voter files to do that. And that's old-fashioned shoe leather, knock on doors, make phone calls. That's what makes
But
it work.
I think, people get very, this will sound crazy, but people get confused about politics in the United States. What actually counts is how many votes get cast. People love to look at polls. They love to look at TV ads. The actual question is, who will leave their couch and go down to the polling place and vote? And that's actually what counts, and that's all about get out the vote. It's about registration, getting people energized, and then delivering them to the polls. If you vote, you have a voice. If you don't, it doesn't matter.
Sally, I want to say something before we wrap up.
Okay, so we're going to wrap up. One more comment here, and then I'm going to close this session because we're over.
Thank you. And the reason I want to present this idea, I don't think we're thinking nearly big enough. And with Gene here, and Tom here, and Sally here, and Tim Worth here, and Ted Turner here, I think Amory Lovins may still be here. Lester Brown is still in the room, many other important thinkers. It would seem to me if you're interested in national security, economic development and durability, environmental integrity, you're interested in who is the next president of the United States. So why not? Why not, Tim? Why not people that know politics well? Gene, why not build a presidential platform that celebrates environmentalism? Because at the end of the day, we don't have healthy landscapes to provide for our needs, you won't be secure, you won't have an economy that's durable and easily shared, and you won't have an environment that matters. It's time that we get somebody that stands up to represent the country that says more than a token word here and there about environmentalism. I like that idea.
One of the things that I'd like to close with is that the energy that these three have brought to this conversation, they are bringing to their work out in the political arena. And this is what we need in America to make a difference. We have been slack. We have not, the Tea Partiers, you know what? They go to the PTA meetings. They go to every single meeting. The Republicans go to every single meeting. We who are concerned about this issue have not really stepped out. And what Tom is doing with his commitment of money and the visibility because of that commitment for stepping out for the right reasons, he's stepping out for the right reasons, is re-energizing, I think, democracy. That there is an opportunity here for anybody who cares a little bit, sort of a lot, that whole spectrum in there can step up with him. And for me, that is really exciting because we haven't had an environmental movement for a long time that could put the pressure on elected officials. When I started in this work, in the long time ago, we could go into a congressman's office or a senator's office and say, you know what? I have a whole legion behind me. I've got 1 million members. I've got people in your state who are going to be knocking on your door. So you better think about this. This is what we need again in this country. And you have put the energy into this that I hope all of us can take away from here, and everybody we know, and we're the converted. So it's going to the people who are not converted. It's going to the independents. It's going to the women who don't show up except for the presidential election. Let's get them out. We have got to activate ourselves again.
Go Sally.
Thank you very much. Thank these three gentlemen, please.
One of the leaders we all admire in the climate change struggle is Vice President Al Gore. He's